witness is Brigid, is it?
That's right, sir.
And let me just say a word before she gives evidence. It is our principle that if we can, we shall try to help witnesses to give the best evidence they would wish to give. And some witnesses, for reasons which you will fully understand, feel it easier if certain changes, adjustments are made. In Brigid's case, she will not have her image live streamed. Her voice will be recorded, exactly what she says. That will be live streamed. Our live streaming will carry that, but not her image. So anyone who is listening out there somewhere to this as I speak will not see a picture of her, they will hear her voice. At the same time, there will be a member of her family sitting beside her, playing no part other than being there for reassurance and support. So, Brigid, please.
Please state your full name.
Brigid Campbell.
And repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely,
I do solemnly, sincerely,
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Brigid, you're here on behalf of your late father, Malachi Devlin, to tell his story.
Yes.
And you're here with your brother, also Malachi, to tell us about the experiences your father went through and how that impacted upon the family as a whole.
Yes.
Now, you've very helpfully provided to the inquiry a copy of a report from Dr. Main dated the 6th of November 1989, which provides us with a lot of information about your father. And I'm going to ask for that to be put on screen. It's 2658002. Sorry, it should come up shortly. And if we go to the next page, please, Paul. Thank you. So we're going to look at various parts of this report to help us understand what happened to your father and to trace through the history of the treatment he received.
Okay. Yep.
So your father had severe haemophilia.
Yes, that's right. Severe haemophilia A.
And he developed a number of what Dr. Main here describes as both common and rare complications of haemophilia.
Yes.
Before we look at some of the details, Brigid, can you recall growing up how your father's haemophilia affected him?
Yeah, well, it was due mainly to a later diagnosis. He wasn't diagnosed with haemophilia until he was 21. So by that stage, he had severe disabilities from that, and that is, his knee joints were completely, affected by that, and he couldn't bend, he had very little mobility in that way. So that would have affected his quality of life, and simple things like trying to put your shoes on, that that would have affected. But as far as we were concerned, he managed the best he could with that, and got on with life the best he could, with managing his condition. Even though he obviously can tell from the report that he had a lot of challenges there. I mean, he also had, as well as the severe haemophilia, he had complications like the pseudo tumour, which I believe only about 2% of people suffer from. But all in all, he showed quite a bit of resilience in overcoming all those complications.
We'll keep this up on screen, and I'll ask you to look at bits of it from time to time. But just dealing with a few of the basic facts about your father's diagnosis and treatment. As you've said, he was diagnosed when he was about 21 years old in 1956. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
And we can see from the report, it's the next page, Paul, if you put that up. Thank you. That he was treated initially in the 1950s with fresh frozen plasma. And if we look down that page to the entry go over the page to 1957, thank you, we see he continued to receive fresh frozen plasma, and we get a flavour of some of the treatments and hospital admissions he endured. He has an admission there that lasted some 22 days.
Yes.
After severe reactions to the infusion of fresh frozen plasma following the extraction of teeth.
Yes.
Yeah. And then if we turn over the page, please, Paul, to 1965 and 1966, we can see there that if we go to 1966, please, thank you, we can see your father being admitted to hospital again in October 1966 for traumatic hemorrhage into his right thigh from being kicked by a cow, is recorded there. I think your father was a farmer.
Yes, he was a farmer initially, and then as time went on, he set up his own business, a farm machinery business, and that's what he worked at until he passed away.
And we can see there that he was treated on this occasion with intravenous cryoprecipitate.
Yes.
And if we go down to 1967, please, Paul, we can see in 1967 he was admitted to hospital again and required cryoprecipitate. And then if we go over the page, please, Paul, to 1971, thank you, we can see again being admitted to hospital with a range of symptoms, and your father developed reactions to cryoprecipitate at that point.
Yes.
And you've made reference to the pseudo-tumour which your father developed. As you've said, that was a rare, extremely rare complication of haemophilia.
Yes.
Swelling of the muscle or bone, which caused him enormous pain and discomfort over his life.
Yes, and he had quite a long hospital admission at one point for that in 1983, where he would have received a lot of factor, and they've classed it as what was life-threatening for him in this. And yet again, he was told at that time that he wouldn't walk again, but he managed to prove Dr. Main wrong on that. He seemed to like to do that. He arrived for one of his hospital appointments in his wheelchair, I believe, but got up and walked down the corridor. So that was kind of the spirit of the man.
If we go down to 1974, which should be a couple of pages further on, we can see there that your father was admitted in September 1974 for the planned extraction of 9 teeth. And on this stage, he is described as being given a test dose of a new freeze-dried factor VIII concentrate called cryobulin. And as far as this report shows, that was the first occasion on which your father was given factor VIII products.
Yes.
And then we can see further on in that section, in that paragraph, that his treatment was changed to regular cryobulin, and he and your mother were trained in the techniques necessary for administering that at home, and he was issued with material to be kept at home. Do you recall
Yes.
your father or your mother assisting your father with the factor VIII products at home?
Yes, I mean, he would have deemed to have been very lucky at that stage in that he was a suitable candidate for home for home treatment, and he did live an hour away from the Royal, so that must have been, quite a major change in, to his quality of life and that. And I do recall him administering his factor at our table at home. I remember him doing that. So.
Now, in 1979, your father was involved in a car accident and suffered serious injuries. What can you recall about that?
Well, I was only 6 at the time, but I just recall that he was in the hospital for quite a period of time, and when he came home, he was in a wheelchair and his leg in plaster because he'd broken his leg in that accident. It was quite a serious accident, and I believe just from this report, because I would have been too young, that the fact that my mum had administered the factor at the time was life-saving for him.
Yes, we can see from the entry in 1979, it records your father being admitted on the 13th of October following a severe car accident. Your mother had administered appropriate factor VIII treatment within a very short time of the accident occurring, and him having multiple injuries. And we can see again your father's admission was lengthy, and he was treated with factor VIII on a regular basis, increased until 17th of November in terms of the dosage.
Yes.
But he was discharged, and we can see Dr. Main here recording that despite his horrendous injuries, he was able to walk again.
Yeah.
And then if we go over the page to 1983, we can see there that having continued on the home treatment programme in relation to factor VIII, there was a further hospital admission in 1983 with a further injection of factor VIII, and then a prolonged admission in relation to the pseudotumour.
Yes.
Now, if we just turn on in this report, Paul, it's page 14. If you look at the page numbers in the very top right-hand corner, please. We can just see here a description of the treatments that your father received in terms of the particular factor products. So we've seen already reference to him receiving cryobuline, and then we're told by Dr. Main in this report, towards the bottom of the page, that in 1979, because of shortages of cryobuline, he was treated with a different commercial factor product, Hemofil.
Yes.
And she describes unforeseen difficulties in the supply continuing, and then we can see the bottom of that page, and over the next page he was then treated with a third commercial product called Factor VIII, produced by Armour in the course of 1983. Now, if we look at the circumstances of your father's hospital admission in 1983. Let's just further down that same page, please, Paul. We can see there an admission of your father to hospital in October 1983, a range of symptoms being described by your father, his pseudotumour having increased in size and reached the size of a full-term pregnancy, having become infected and extensive internal hemorrhage. And he's recorded as having been treated with continuous intravenous antibiotics and regular factor VIII infusions. And then we can see down the very bottom of that page, during this admission, so this is the latter part of 1983, consideration was given to the possibility that Mr. Devlin might have developed the AIDS syndrome, and then it said that on clinical examination there was nothing to support that supposition. Now, in terms of your father discovering at some point in the mid-1980s that he had been infected from factor VIII products, I'm going to ask you to look back at page 11 of this report. to the next page, please, Paul. Thank you. And if we look down the bottom of that page under the heading December 1984, Brigid, and I know you've read this report, so I'm hoping none of this will be a surprise to you. You will see there being described plans being laid in December 1984 to interview all the patients attending the Northern Ireland Haemophilia Centre to have frank discussions regarding the possibilities of becoming infected or already being infected by the AIDS virus. And we can see at the very bottom of that page a description of actual testing of samples commencing on the 2nd of January 1985 and the results being kept in a confidential notebook and a locked filing cabinet. That's over the page, top of the following page. Now, I'm going to ask, we'll come back to this document, but I'm going to ask for another document to be put on screen first. It's 2658009, please, Paul. So we can see this is a letter, it's dated the 25th of March 1985, and it's an invitation from Dr. Main to your father to come to the centre for a blood test on the 19th of April, and she's explained in the body of that letter that it's to test in relation to AIDS. Can you see that?
Yes, yeah.
And then if we please have up on screen, please, Paul, 2658008. This is a letter dated the 6th of August 1985 from Dr. Main to your father's GP. And we can see from this that the test must have taken place. And what's said there is this: the problem of testing for response to the AIDS virus is well known throughout the media, and my policy has been asked to ask each patient when they're being tested if each individual wishes to know the result or not. At the meeting, Malachy himself declared that he did not wish to know the result, therefore I have respected his wishes and have not informed him. And then there is a reference to writing to your mother, Mrs. Devlin, to come at the next visit for her own test.
Yeah.
Now, these are records that you've only seen very recently, is that right?
Yes, well, these some of these notes have only just been released on Friday evening, so I've just seen this for the first time today.
And if we go,
just before you leave there, the last paragraph there, the reason for this policy appears, does it, to be to keep panic down, rather than prevent there being a general health risk to others through cross-infection?
well, so certainly what Dr. Main says in this letter, which obviously is a contemporaneous document, is I have been trying to keep the panic situation at the minimal level throughout the province's haemophilic population, hence this practice.
So that's the reason for
That's-
not telling people or giving them the choice.
Well, that is the reason that's described in this statement, so yes, in this letter, so yes, at the time. And Brigid, there's just a couple more letters to look at, and then I'm going to ask you about what you said in your statement about this. So if we have, please, on screen 2658007, we can see that following on from the letter of August 1985, this is a letter, and it's addressed to both your parents, dated the 13th of September 1985, and it says that the result of the testing for Mrs. Devlin, that's your mother, has come back and has found to be negative.
Yes.
And then last in this series of correspondence, if we could have up on screen, please, Paul, 2658003. Just go to the next page, which is the letter. If we could just highlight that, please. 17th of October 1985. So this is about a month after the letter that was sent to both your parents about your mother's test results. And it says this: Dear Malachy, you'll be glad to know that you became positive sometime between February 1983 and October 1983. We have no sample between those two dates, but I imagine that you became positive sometime during the summer of 1983. Therefore, you have more than passed the 2-year point. I hope this information is of some help to you. Now, in your statement, Brigid, and at that point you'd not seen any of the earlier letters, as you say, they've only very recently been provided to you by the Trust. But in your statement, you made some observations about that letter there. What was your thought on seeing that letter?
Well, I mean, it is bizarre to think that anybody's going to be glad to know that they became HIV positive in February 1983. I don't know the context, in which the letter was sent, but these are. My dad would have been a patient of hers, for many years at that stage, and it just seems crazy to have, communicated something like that in a letter in the first place. But as I say, I don't know the context really behind that. I mean, it all seems quite confusing as well, that he's been sent a letter in 85, yet the family doctors were also sent a letter to say that he didn't want to know about being positive. So it's quite unclear to me, and as you say, these have only just become available today, this morning, just seen these.
And in your witness statement, you'd expressed both a degree of concern about the use of the phrase "you will be glad," but also about this method of disclosing information about the diagnosis. And you also weren't clear as to when the diagnosis was first known and whether there'd been some delay in informing your father. Is that right? Those were your concerns at the time?
Yes, but just reading some of that synopsis that you've just had up on the screen there, it does say that he was clinically examined for the AIDS syndrome in 1983. So it's just it's not for me to say, but it's just unclear. It would, while you're clinically examining someone, it obviously was known that it was a risk. There's also a comment about, the results were kept in a filing cabinet for those that didn't wish to know. So, my question is, those people were people infected but sent off home with a deadly virus, to put families at risk, to put everyone at risk, and not being given the proper information, or I don't know. It's just all quite unclear as to what was happening.
And in view of what you'd said in your witness statement and that letter from the 17th of October 1985, those concerns were notified to Dr. Main, and you've seen Dr. Main's response now this morning. And I wonder whether we can just have that up on screen, please, Paul. It's 736001, but it's paragraph 4 of that statement, please. Section 4. Whilst we're getting that up on screen, Brigid, what you've seen Dr. Main relating that statement is that in fact she did communicate the diagnosis to your father in person on a home visit.
Yes, I'm not aware of any of that, but even with that kind of type of communication and that language, to think anyone would be glad to have a HIV virus just seems inappropriate to me.
And I think in fairness to Dr. Main, whilst we're waiting for it to come up on screen, I'll just read out the passage of her statement that deals with this. It says, I recall that Mr. Devlin was unable to attend the hospital in 1985 to receive his results, so I told him I could travel to him, and she gives some explanation of trying to find the house. We sat down and I told him the very unwelcome news. I recall his disbelief and him asking me if I could find out when exactly he was infected. I explained that I would try to find out and that anyway one confirmatory sample was needed to confirm/deny the result. I recall him saying that he would be glad if I could find out and let him know. I asked Mr. Devlin to come up to Belfast for the results, but he maintained repeatedly that he would be glad to have a letter. I recall that he asked me to leave as I would be drawing attention with my car, hospital badge and doctor on call notice. I hope this explains the letter and the seemingly appalling use of the word glad. So that's what Dr. Main has said now in response to the concerns you expressed in your statement.
Yes, well, it's fair enough. She's given her account of it all, and perhaps she sent the letter in good faith as he asked, but I still think, you know, the language used in it is inappropriate for what she's talking about.
Now, just really for the record, I don't need to ask you to look at the test result documents or put them on screen, but there is material in Dr. Main's report which records that the last negative sample, as subsequently tested, of your father's blood was 4th of February 1983. The first positive sample was the 10th of January 1984. And on that basis, she sets out in the report that we were looking at before, her opinion that your father seroconverted in the course of 1983.
Yes.
Now, do you have any recollection yourself, leaving aside what's in any of these records or reports or anything you've recently seen from them, do you have any recollection yourself of any conversations at home about this or how you found out that your father was infected with HIV?
Well, my mum did tell me about it. I can't recall exactly when, but as far as I remember, it would have been within a year before he died. It wasn't any longer than that. So, just now, seeing all this information is really upsetting. If he did know in 1985, I was 12, to think that was going on in the background in our home, which we were obviously protected from and not aware of. I was told about it around about a year before he died.
And you've also recorded in your statement that you're aware that your father was diagnosed at some point with hepatitis C and hepatitis B, but you
Yes.
don't, I think, know anything of the timing or the circumstances of those diagnoses.
Well, the hepatitis C we only became aware of because Dr. Benson had contacted us a few years back, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, that there was a Skipton fund available, and that my mum was eligible to apply for that, for compensation payment from that. So it was only at that stage that I knew that he had also had hepatitis C.
If we just have up on screen one more document in relation to that, please. It's 2658005. And we can see this is a letter 25th of October 1990. This is written very shortly after your father's death, from Dr. Main to the family GP or your father's GP. And we can see in the last sentence it says investigation indicated that he was hepatitis C positive. But as far as you're concerned, that's something you only discovered, is it many years after his death?
Yes, and I mean, again, I don't know whether he knew that or my mum knew that. That was, we wouldn't have been included in that communication, but that's, as far as ourselves are concerned, we only knew about that a few years back, as I said.
Before we talk about the circumstances in which your father became more unwell and died, can I just ask you a little about your father's character and personality? You've made reference to his determination and perseverance in your witness statement.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about him?
Well, I think, as I say, that despite the severe disabilities that he had from his condition, that both him and my mum were hard workers. He set up his own business and was very successful with that. He, as far as I'm concerned, he got on with life, and I presume himself had a lot of difficulties that I wouldn't have been aware of, and a lot of challenges. He had a great love of sport, particularly Gaelic football. I mean, anyone that'll ask, you mention my dad's name to anyone, it's the first thing they'll think of, that he attended every football match there was going. I mean, there was a lot of our childhood spent at travelling to different football matches. So he obviously showed great resilience and courage with his condition, and there would have been, we would have been familiar enough with the Royal and Ward 22 with different admissions and visiting, but all in all, he did get on with life, and things were as any other family, and we would have gone on summer holidays every year. So yeah, I think he coped admirably with his condition.
Dr. Mains described your father in her statement in this way. Mr. Devlin was one of the most disabled and severe haemophilia patients that attended the centre. He was one of the most courageous, long-suffering and resilient of patients. He was also at times more than a little stubborn. He was in receipt of my undying admiration. And the report that we looked at earlier, written by Dr. Main in 1989, talked about him learning to walk, or walking again, despite medical views to the contrary, and talked about his amazing resilience. And that's the father you remember.
Yeah, and that's, it's a great compliment to him that, despite such difficulties and challenges with it all, that he did try and get on with things, and he would have really enjoyed proving Dr. Main wrong. He wouldn't have been the easiest patient, I imagine.
Now, you've told us how you were informed of your father's illness by your mother, and it was about the time you were studying for your A-levels, is that right?
Yeah.
And your mother passed on some advice to you to take care not to share a glass that your dad had drank from, and not to ask him for a drink from his bottle of orange if you were out in the car.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to recall events from, over 30 years ago, but I do recall my mother telling me, and I do recall that was part of the conversation. I'm not sure whether, I think they did know that it perhaps couldn't be transmitted that way, but there was obviously a great paranoia about it, and to be as protective as possible. And I mean, I don't know how he felt about it. Perhaps I had been asking for drinks and that was upsetting him. I don't know. And then, but my mum told me, and to not to do that, not to put him in that position. Your
father became more unwell in the course of 1990, and you helped your mum caring for him at home for a while.
Yeah.
What, if anything, can you recall about how he was at that time?
Well, I remember that would have been around September time, and I do recall they did go on a summer holiday somewhere that year as well, but so that he got very sick very quickly. I recall him, being at home in bed. He had really bad diarrhea, and I do recall that he was coughing up like lumps of blood at one point, because I did help my mum with trying to move him in the bed, and he was very unwell at that stage, and I think resisting having to be admitted to hospital. But that's what happened in the end. He went to the Royal in an ambulance, and we went with him. So.
And your father was in hospital for about a month until he died.
Yeah.
And you've described in your statement how on the occasion of this hospital admission, he was in a separate room and nurses put on gloves and aprons when entering the room, and you described that as being different from previous hospital visits.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, because he was in a room of his own, and that's just something different from previous times.
Now, your father died on the 17th of October 1990 in hospital.
Yes, that's right.
And you've exhibited to your witness statement his death certificate, and I'm just going to ask for that to be put up on screen. It's 2658004. And we can see in the middle of that the causes of death given. And we can see from that septicemia, chest infection, haemophiliac pseudotumour, and no reference there to HIV or AIDS.
No reference, and also there's no reference to double pneumonia was what we were told at the time, that's what he actually had at the end.
Your witness statement describes the funeral arrangements and how they were different from what would have been the tradition. Can you tell us about that, if you're able?
Yeah. What would be the normal Catholic tradition is that you have an open coffin where the body is displayed for a wake. So that would have been my mother's wishes, that my dad's wake would have been as you would expect, but it had to be different from that. The undertaker was contacted about a week before he died to inform him that he was that he had AIDS and had HIV and was dying of AIDS, and they expected him to die within the next couple of weeks. He was put under, he describes it as under quite a bit of pressure to lay the body out as expected, or there was mention of cremation, and that wouldn't have been my mum or dad's wishes, so they came to an arrangement in the end. The undertaker will quite vividly describe how he received my dad's body in what he called a disaster bag from the Royal, and was under a lot of stress to make sure that he dealt with that appropriately as arranged, so that the arrangement was that the coffin was allowed to be open for one night, with strict restrictions in that his hands were covered, and there was like a net across his face, which is obviously very different from any other wake that anyone would be to.
Can I ask you a little about the impact of your father's death on the family? First of all, the impact on your mother.
Yeah, well, when my father's death was life-changing for the family. It left a huge gap in the family for every future event, Christmas, birthdays, graduation, or marriages, the grandkids that he never got to meet. But yes, my mother was most affected by it, and this is as much this is much for her today too, because she was in a very, very difficult and vulnerable position. She had lost her husband, her life partner, and since that, my mum passed away 4 years ago, so she spent that 25 years, alone. So it's just a really turbulent time and of, uncertainty, because she was left with an overwhelming responsibility. She was left with, obviously 2 teenage kids who were only 14 and 17. There was the business, there was a farm of land, and she was left on her own with all of that. And she'd obviously also had the burden of the secrecy of it all, of the stigma that was attached to it. There was nothing, it was all very swept under the carpet. There wasn't, still to this day, I don't know who was told what, or if people know what my dad died of. She also had to go through the trauma of having to be tested for HIV herself. And she struggled with that, and she found it difficult to cope. She really struggled. It affected her greatly. I don't want to go into too much more detail on that, but it was very difficult for both of us, and it would have affected relationships with her as well. It affected her personality, her behaviour, her mental health. She became almost reclusive in that she liked to stay at home and do her own thing. Just didn't socialise as much anymore. I don't recall her having much support in that way, and she was left with difficult decisions to make on her own, I expect. And it's sad that that she was left in that position.
You've described how she tried to keep the farm machinery business going, but that she wasn't able to do so, and she had to sell it. She had to sell the house and the farm and move into a smaller house that your father had been in the process of renovating.
Yes.
And you put it this way, she lived life as a widow.
She did, yeah.
And then, Brigid, the impact upon you, you said in your statement you adored your dad, you were very much a daddy's girl, and you were 17 when he died. Your brother, I think, was 14.
Yeah.
And your statement records how you have felt your father's absence from your 18th birthday, 8 months after he died, and all the important milestones in your life that followed.
Yeah.
And in particular, you've identified as one of those milestones when you got married. It was your brother who gave you away rather than your father, because your father wasn't there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Did your father, as far as you know, receive any counselling or emotional or psychological or other support in the years between his diagnosis in 1985 and his death in 1990?
Well, I mean, not that I'm aware of. I didn't know that it was even that he had HIV until around 1989 or so. So I have no idea if what support, if any, him or my mum received.
In terms of you and your brother, did either of you receive any kind of support, emotional support, counselling, therapy of any kind?
No, we didn't receive anything.
Your brother's given a witness statement to the inquiry as well, and he's described the lack of support for bereaved children as being forgotten about on an emotional level. The children were left to a life of pain and emotional problems. Do you think that's a fair description of how you two feel that you were left?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it was very difficult, the fact that your parent has died, but the circumstances of it, having to, the whole secrecy of everything. I mean, I have a family relative recently who described it all as a great mystery. No one, people were maybe guessing things, but it wasn't really being said out loud. So yeah, that those things all, made it more difficult.
You've overheard a conversation once between your mother and your aunt, working out that they would tell people that your father died of cancer. Is that right? Or is that incorrect? My understanding might be wrong.
No,
Okay,
I'm
don't
not sure
worry.
what then.
Can I then just ask you one further thing arising from what you've set out in your statement? And that's in relation to your own child who has haemophilia. And you've described in your statement that his care is an exceptionally good quality, that you feel very supported.
Yeah.
But you're left with a residual fear because of what your father went through. Can you explain that?
Well, I mean, I don't have any fear that there's any issue with the treatment that he gets with his recombinant factor, but it's just a chilling thought that that ever was the case, that the treatment that you were given was doing anything other than replacing the missing factor. And as I say, yeah, there's an exemplary care from the haemophilia centre here. There's an exceptional team of people there, but you would just want to be, you'd want to be certain that there was never going to be anything that would go wrong that would compromise the care of your child.
Before I ask Mr. Williams, who represents you, if there's anything further he thinks should be asked, is there anything further you'd like to add, Brigid?
Yeah, I've just got a little bit that I have written out, if that's okay. And it was just to say that it is, this is a big decision. It's extremely difficult, sharing personal information in public, and the profound effect my father's death had on our family. The medical report refers to my father's amazing resilience, and it's therefore heartbreaking that treatment he depended on exposed him to known and fatal risk. My dad's death was preventable. We owe it to him today, and to my mum and to our family, to ensure that his life counts.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Mr. Williams if there's anything further. Yes, there's just one further matter, Brigid, which is just to ask you about how it was that your father's medical records did become available in the last few days.
I had a phone conversation with Dr. Benson, and just discovered that my dad's notes were still there. So he very promptly acted on that and got the notes released as efficiently as he could. I believe he got that done within a day or so, that they arrived with you on Friday afternoon. So
So it's through discussions you had with Dr. Benson that notes that you had previously asked for but not been given became available in the last few days.
Yes, and it's thanks to Dr. Benson that he's got those released for us here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Brigid. Sir.
Well, I have nothing to ask, just to thank you for your courage in coming to say what has plainly been difficult for you. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a break now for lunch and come back at 25 to 3.
Sir, yes. there's one further witness this afternoon, Mrs. E.
Yes, and then we have to listen to some submissions.
Yes.
25 to 3.